All right, so the last thing that we're going to take a look at here is how to actually have the changes reflected when the user either tries to remove an email or add an email to this list. Now, in order to make this work, what we're going to do is we're going to modify our notes provider component, and we're going to give it a few extra methods, right, or functions inside of it. All right, so in addition to doing things like creating notes, updating notes, deleting notes, etc., we're going to add functions for sharing a note and for unsharing a note. Okay, so we'll say const share note, and this is going to be an asynchronous function which takes an email as an argument, right? The email that we're sharing the note with. And eventually what this is going to do is make a network request to our server to update that, right? We'll have a special endpoint on there for sharing notes and for unsharing notes. But for now, all we're going to do, just to simulate this and to get it working, at least on the front end, is we're just going to modify this notes state variable in order to incorporate the sharing stuff into it. Okay, so what we're going to do is share the specified note with this email. And basically to do that, we're just going to have to add that to the notes, to one of the notes properties. And, additionally, we're also going to need the ID, of course, of the note that we're sharing with. And you know what, we'll just call that note ID to make it super clear what that's supposed to be. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say set notes, and we're basically going to map through all of our notes. You're probably familiar with this by now. We're going to say notes.map, and for each note, if the note's ID equals this note ID that we're sharing, then what we're going to do, here we're going to say note.id equals note ID. And if that's the case, then we're going to get all of the properties from the note. Plus, we're going to have a shared with emails property on that note. This will be something that we'll get from the server eventually. And here, let me just indent this a little bit so that it's more readable. I'm going to just indent at the question mark there. And the shared with emails is going to be the current shared with emails property on our note, plus this new email that we're adding here. So the way we do that here is by saying note.sharedwithemails.concat, and we're going to add that email onto there. All right? Cool. So if the note isn't that matching note, we're just going to return the note, and that is our share note function for now. Now, one thing that isn't going to work about this quite yet is this shared with emails thing. Since that doesn't exist, we're going to get an error. So what I'm going to do, this is going to be tremendously ugly right now, but it'll just hold us over until we actually add this logic to our server. We're just going to say if note.sharedemails doesn't exist, we're going to return an empty array. And basically what that means is that if a note doesn't have any shared with emails yet, or even have that property, we'll just be creating a new array with this single email inside of it. You'll see what I mean shortly. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is create our unshare note. And what that's going to look like, we're going to say async note ID, and we're going to specify the email we want to unshare that note with. And here's what this one's going to look like. It's going to be the same basic logic as we had up there, but instead of adding that email to our shared with emails array, we're going to say shared with emails equals, and then we're going to do that filter thing that you're probably familiar with by now as well. We're going to say note.sharedwithemails.filter, and we want only the emails, we'll just say E here, only the emails that are not equal to the email argument that's getting passed in here. Cool, so we have share note and unshare note. I think that the logic in here is fairly sound. We'll have to put that to the test shortly. And the next thing we need to do is make these two functions available to any of the components inside this provider by passing these two functions to the value object. So we're going to say share note and unshare note. And let's just indent this thing a little bit because it's getting kind of ugly. We're going to do this and that and that, and we're going to do that again with all of these things that we're providing to the components inside this provider. Okay, cool. So now that we've done that, let's actually use this share note and unshare note function. And then we're going to open up our note sharing settings page. And in addition to getting the notes and is loading from the context, we're going to say share note and unshare note. Okay, and now that we have those, we're going to go down here and we're going to swap out on add and on delete with the corresponding functions that we just got from the context. So we're going to say share note with that email when an email is being added, and we're going to say unshare note with that email when a given email is being removed from the list. Now, as for these emails that we're passing to shared emails, we're going to need to actually get these from the note itself, right? Remember, we're now using this shared with emails property here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say note.shared with emails. There we go. And because this could potentially be undefined on a given note, we're going to add a backup value here, which is just going to be an empty array. All right, and that's actually what it will start out with because our note isn't going to have that property yet. That's something that we're going to have to add to the back end for this. Cool, so let's make sure we've saved everything, and let's go take a look and see if these functions actually work. So I'm going to go back here. We see that we don't have any emails right now, and right off the bat, we might want to just add some text there saying something like this note currently isn't shared with anybody. So let's do that. We're going to say paragraph. This is going to have the class name of week, right? So that it will be displayed as kind of an italic message. And what we're going to do is say this note is not currently shared with anyone. And there we go. Okay. So let's enter a new email to share this note with. We're just going to say something like abc@gmail.com. And if we click on share now, it looks like that didn't work. All right, so let's go back here and take a look at what's going on. We're going to go back to our notes provider. And, oh, I see what we did. We didn't pass the note ID. So we need to go back here now. And for share note, we need to pass in the note ID, which we have from the URL parameter. And same thing for unshare note. All right, so glad we figured that out. Let's give this another try. We're going to say abc@gmail.com. Click on share. And sure enough, that email shows up. Let's add a few more. In fact, they don't even have to be emails at this point. We can just type in anything we want. And now if we click remove on that, did you see what just happened there? I didn't actually mean for that to happen, but since we had the same value in multiple items, because of the filtering logic we're using, it removed all of those items. So in other words, if you have two items that are equal to each other, because of our logic, when you delete one, it's going to delete the other as well. Now that may or may not be something we want, and when we actually add backend logic, we'll probably want to add in some kind of logic to make sure that you can't add a user's email twice. But here, if we add something else now, we'll just say xyz@gmail.com and click share. And now we can delete those things and add them and, everything else just like we want to. Another thing to notice is that if you just click share without typing anything into the input here, it's going to create an empty item. So eventually we're going to want to prevent that from happening as well. But anyway, we've really got the front end working with this whole note sharing thing. So what we're going to be doing next, of course, is adding all of this backend logic and network requests that are necessary for making this thing really work with multiple users. But before we move on, there are actually two more things that we need to fix here. One is, you may have noticed that this note is not currently shared with anyone message didn't actually disappear when we added someone to our list here, right? So we're going to have to go back into our React code and fix that. And to do that, let's open up our note sharing settings page. And we're going to find that little message, right? This note is not currently shared with anyone. And what we're going to want to do is make this message disappear when there actually are shared emails. Now, in order to do this, all we really have to do is we have to say, in curly braces here, we're going to say note.shared with emails, and we can say .length. And if the shared with emails array is longer than 0, right? So if the length is greater than 0, then and only then will we display that thing. Oh, and actually that should be reversed. That should be if this thing is equal to 0, then and only then do we want to display this message. So if we go back and take a look now, that thing should have disappeared. And if we remove this shared email, then we should see this note is not currently shared with anyone message. And of course, if we add another one here, xyz@gmail.com, and click share, we should see that show up. Now, the second thing that I want to fix here is I want to make sure that what the user enters inside this input is actually an email address, right? Well, and First of all, we also want to make sure that the user has actually entered in something at all, since what they can do is just click share, and as we can see, that will enter in an empty item to this list, which is definitely not what we want. It just looks bad when our application allows users to do that sort of thing. So what this is going to look like, we're going to have to go back here, and we're going to have to open up this shared emails component. So let's open that component up right here. And then what we're going to want to do here is when the user has entered something into the input and actually clicked on this button, instead of directly calling on add new email, right, when the user clicks on that button, we'll first want to check to see whether or not the value that the user has entered is valid, right? So we're going to want to check and make sure that, first of all, the user has entered something at all, and we're going to want to also check to make sure that that something is an email. So instead of just calling the onAdd prop directly, what we're going to do is we're going to say onClickAdd, and this is of course going to have to be const onClickAdd, and what it's going to do is it's going to call onAdd if the value of new email is valid. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to define an error message, right? We're just going to do this as a state variable, so we'll say const error message and set error message. And of course, we're going to want to display this error message above the input if the user enters in something that's not valid. And the starting value, of course, of this error message is going to be an empty string. And then what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to check to see if the user has entered anything at all for the email. So we'll say if new email, right? That'll just check if the string is longer than 0 characters. And if that's not true, we're actually going to want to put a not in front of that. Then we'll want to say return set error message, and then what we'll do is we'll set that to please enter an email value. Or you know what, we'll just say please enter a value, period. Cool, so otherwise, the next thing that we're going to want to do is check to make sure that the new email is actually an email address. And in order to do that, we're going to use the email regular expression. Now, you might remember this from earlier when we looked at creating reusable forms in React. Basically, I'm just going to copy and paste that. You can find this using an easy Google search. Just look up email regex. And what we're going to do is just up here above where we define our component, I'm going to paste that email regular expression. And then we can check to see if this new email state variable here is an actual email address by saying if not email regex dot test. And we're going to test the new email value here. So in other words, if that's not an email, what we're going to do is say return set error message, and we're going to say please enter a valid email address. All right. Now, on the other hand, if neither of those things, right, if neither of these errors occurs, then we're going to want to just call this onAdd function, and to do that, we just say onAdd, and just like we did down here, we're just going to say new email, and we're going to say set new email to an empty string again. So I'm just going to copy those and paste those here, and now we should be able to adjust the indentation, and that should be exactly what we want there. Now, one thing to note is that this set new email to an empty string and onAdd won't be called if either of these errors occurs, right? So if the new email doesn't exist, or if it's not an email address, then we won't be calling, right? So this prop here is only going to be called if everything goes well, right? If the value is actually valid. Cool, so now that we have this onClickAdd function, the next thing we're going to do is simply replace the onClick prop for our button, and we're going to change that, of course. Oops, let me try that again. We're going to change that to this function, and we're going to say onClickAdd. And there we go. All right, that should take care of all of that logic for us. Now, as far as actually displaying this error message, we're going to want to do that above the input. So what we're going to do there is we're just going to check to see if the error message exists, and if it does, we're going to display a paragraph tag, and this will simply have the error message inside of it. So we'll just say error message like that, and that should take care of everything for us. Now, we are going to want to add some styling to this, assuming that we already have some CSS styles for this. Yep, and sure enough, we have this error style, so what we're going to do is just go back to this paragraph tag, and we're going to say class name equals error, and that should take care of styling that nicely for us. Cool, so let's give this thing a try now. What we're going to want to do is go back to our application and we'll try just clicking share now. And what we should see is that this error occurs saying, please enter a value. All right. And if we try and enter something in that's not an email address, we'll see that the value of that error message changes accordingly. And likewise, if we actually do enter in a valid email address, like abc@gmail.com, then we see that that will show up in the list. Now, one more thing, we will want to also reset this error message, of course, if the user enters in a valid email address, because right now it's just kind of hanging around. So let's go back here, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, up at the top of onClick add, set error message to an empty string, right? So that will basically clear out whatever the error message was before and run the rest of the logic for us. So just to check this again, let's try abc2@gmail.com and click on share. And sure enough, we'll see that that error message disappears and abc2@gmail.com shows up in this list. Awesome. So now that we've added those two other things, I think we're probably ready to wrap up here. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.